Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and welcome to the first installment. Welcome to the first episode of what I hope is a very helpful series. I'm finally dropping it. The Visionary PvP Guide for Beginners. This is a question I get more than anything. How do I get into PvP sauce? Look no further. This is the ultimate guide, coming from a guy who's on PvP for years, who has all visionaries, who's gotten a warlord on all of them. Weird flex, I guess. Today, I'm gonna go through every school, and we're gonna go through how each of them work at Visionary, and what are the best ways to counterplay them. Now, some of these are easier than others, but all of them have counters. So without further ado, here's how you counter every school in Visionary PvP and Wizard101. I hope this helps. Let's get right into it. Let's start with Storm Wizards. Now, Storm is actually exceptionally good at PvP right now. It's mainly because they have three big ways that they can get the win. One way that they can get a win is with a Storm Lord into a Shadow hit with some buffs like a Bubble or a Galvanic Field Up, and that combo will generally do anywhere from 6k to 7k health depending on your resist. The other avenue that they have to success is bolt spamming, so they can insane bolt a lot, they can wild bolt a lot. The third really big strategy right now for Storm 1v1s is Scion. So basically just catch of the day a lot and make sure that their opponent doesn't have blades, and then they just Scion, because if their opponent doesn't have blades, this basically does 3000 base, and given you have normal storm damage, is pretty much going to one-shot you 9 out of 10 times. Some of these are a little easier to counter than others. The best way to counter the Stormlord combo is obviously just a stun block. You should be able to carry stun blocks to the point where you pull them very reliably. As you can see, I rock 5 stun blocks on this wizard with a very small deck overall. This works very well for my Storm Wizard, but yeah, anywhere from 5 to 6 stun blocks, you should always be able to pull it first or second turn. If you don't pull it first turn, discard very heavily, because the second this combo is out of there, you remove one of the 3 main ways a Storm is actually going to be able to win. Now, the second way that a Storm can win very easily is with Scion. The best way to counter this is to put on blades that, 1, are hard to remove, and 2, are hard for you to use. So one thing you can do is put on multiple blades that are the same, but try to put an Aegis on it. So you learn the spell from the Astral School in the Arcanum. The other thing you can do, which touches on the point of basically blading in a way that you won't be able to use the spells, is just use off-school blades. The best example of this is Elemental Blades for the Elemental schools and Spirit Blades for Spirit schools. Now, on the topic of countering Scion, the other spell that's really good against Scion, and it's very underrated, are all the King Art spells. So a good example of this is Balance King Art, right? Basically, not only does it hit, but it also gives you a blade, and it also gives them a -45 weakness. So essentially, not only do you have a blade so you can't get Scion, but you also have to make them remove a 45 weakness. King Art is probably the best Storm Scion counter that there is for balance anyways, but if you can, and you don't have any other options, especially if the Storm that you're going against is sitting on a shield, and it seems like you need to blade so they can't Scion, but you also have to remove the shield so that, you know, you can actually hit, King Art is probably one of your best bets. If you can counter the Stormlord combo, and you can counter the Scion combo, you still have to watch out for Insane Bolt and Wild Bolt. All this really involves is doing as many things as you can do to hit and shield, or hit and weakness, which, depending on your school, you actually will have access. Even if they use Insane Bolt or Wild Bolt, at this point, they're running the risk of it hitting low end or it backfiring and killing them. So if you can force them into bolting, you're actually winning against the Storm. So forcing them into the third strategy is probably the best thing to do. Let's move on to the damn Ice Wizards. Ice is by far one of the hardest schools to counterplay against. They have a lot of health, they have a lot of resist, they have a lot of damage. They don't even really give up accuracy or pip chance to get stats like that. And generally, their gear will also give them very high shadow pip ratings. So how in the world do you counter this? One of the best ways to counter them is just to have Ice Ward on your pet. I would argue that Ice Ward is probably the only ward that you absolutely need on some characters. And if you're struggling against Ice, Socketing an Ice Ward is probably one of the best moves that you can do. You'll notice that even with very, very good stats all around, you will notice that my armor piercing on my ice, even with all the good stats, is still only around 30. And this is something that you do have to take advantage of. You're always going to want to try to put one debuff against an ice. Brace is a really, really good one because, you know, you have 5 rounds of a 20% aura. If you put this brace on, I guarantee to you, no ice is gonna hit into that unless they're in Shrike. But Sauce, what happens when they Shrike? When they Shrike, your best options are to have a Triage TC up or a Shift TC up. If you can Shift or Triage their Frostbite and make them do a weaker follow-up hit, that isn't as good. Additionally, one of the best things you can do against an ice anyways is make sure that they do not keep their bubble up. If they keep their bubble up, unlike every other school, they have a 40% bubble. It's some versions of TC Balefrost can go all the way up to 50%. So no matter what, if you can, you should try to keep up bubble. As a final note, try to get them below 90% HP as soon as possible, because Scion does do quite a bit of damage. Sometimes, if an Ice Wizard just blades up 3 times at the beginning, and you happen to not have a shield, and you happen not to do enough damage, they'll literally just Shrike and Scion, and it'll throw you into a really, really unrecoverable position. Definitely the hardest one to counter on this list, for sure, but let's move on to the next one, which is fire. Now, fire, generally, if you are PvPing against a fire, what you'll run up against is someone with like 160 damage, mid-tier health, but, you know, lots of accuracy, sometimes low resist. What you're going to want to do against a fire is pressure them early and pressure them hard. The best pressuring tool against a fire is basically overtimes. When you overtime, you essentially keep them open. If you have no shields on a fire and they're running something with low resist, they're gonna be very, very defenseless, and even something slightly weaker will end up doing a lot just because they're low resist. Now, obviously, there are some schools that can't overtime. We're talking about Balance, we're talking about Storm. For Storm, all you really gotta do is just set up for a Scion and remove their blades. This is just something that works across the aisle, and for Balance, what you're gonna want to do is just keep their pips low so that they cannot combo you with the free. So you're gonna use mana burn a lot against fire and pop their auras. That's how you're going to need to play against them. But for every other school, the best thing that you could do is overtime them as much as possible and just make them shield until they run out. Once a fire wizard runs out of shields, they're going to start defaulting on a free when you overtime, and you will start winning if you can make them a free into a shield. So your goal is to keep on putting on overtimes and try to keep a shield up, make them a free into a shield, and eventually they'll lose so many pips and so much health that they'll actually lose. As a final note against fire, if you have shift or triage, do not discard them no matter what. It seems weird because like a lot of people like have gotten used to fires just doing 2 shots, but burning rampage is making a comeback. So if you're losing to a fire because you discarded a triage or a shift and they burning rampage, it's gonna suck, because if you had shifted that, you would win it like in an instant. So make sure that even if you suspect that they're not gonna use the overtime, if you can afford it, always keep a shift or a triage in hand, and you should be winning against most fire wizards. Balance. Balance is by far the second easiest to counter, I think. Right after fire, I think balance makes a very, very close second. Now, right now, balance is in a very, very bad spot in PvP, so you shouldn't have too much trouble in general, but the principles are the same no matter what. The 2 spells that currently make balance even remotely usable in PvP are Mana Burn and Supernova. Now, here's the thing. If you don't have an aura pet, then you never have to cast an aura, and all of these Supernovas will just be useless. So, if you don't have an aura pet, you're probably not going to struggle against most balances anyway. But the other thing you do have to worry about is Mana Burn, especially because now, when it says loses 3 pips, it doesn't make you lose 3 power pips. It makes you lose 1 power pip and a new pip. So if you have a lot of pips against a balance that also has a lot of pips, they can actually spam this. And since you're losing fewer pips than before, it'll keep doing a lot of damage. So basically, on any wizard, just make sure that you don't stack up on pips too much, because if you do, this will do a lot of damage. Regardless of whether you can enchant Mana Burn or not, if someone has 14 pips and the balance happened to gaze the round before, this is just going to do an obscene amount of damage. Mana Burn is only as powerful as you let it be, so do not let the spell be that powerful. But yeah, balance, super easy to counter. Let's move on to life. Life is in a really, really weird spot in PvP because there are two completely different ways to play it. So depending on what you're going against, you're going to want to play very, very differently. The way to know what kind of life you're generally playing on, if they have a lot of health, generally speaking, they're giving up a lot of crit for it, and you're going against a tank life. So if you're looking at 9,000 HP like this wizard, you're looking at a tank life. Now, if you're going against someone who's running 80% crit or more to crit heal a lot, then you'll generally see them be more around the 7,000 to 8,000 range of health. So the first thing you do when you know that your opponent is a life, you just look at their health and then you decide what to do. If you're going against a crit life, because their heals are going to do so much health, they're going to heal for so much, you're going to always want to go for the one shot. Now, unfortunately, this is one of the cases where some schools actually don't have the ability to counter this. The only thing a balance can do against a crit life is keep a bunch of shields and weaknesses off and either go for a max pip judgment with a bubble and a punishment or something up, or go for the Scion. Both of these are very, very hard to pull off, so balance will struggle against this the most. But every other school, you can just use your Scion, or you could just use a heavily bladed hit and aegis a lot of those blades so they can't be removed easily, and that is how you beat a crit life. Most schools that have a good Scion will not struggle against a crit life. Storm won't struggle, Myth won't struggle, Fire won't struggle. If you're on a Det, you're going to want to have Doom and Gloom up a lot, and if you're on an Ice, you are gonna struggle a lot against this. It's almost unwinnable on an Ice, just like balance. But again, you're just gonna want to blade up several times. Keep the same blade up multiple times on yourself and just frostbite into a hit. That's the only way you're gonna beat this if they're critting. Now, if you go against someone with 9,000 health and they're tanking, what you want to do is focus on infectioning them a few times and then just whittle them down. A tank life will not be able to out heal you that easily, especially if you can just pressure them with strike, overtimes, all that jazz. You should be in very, very good shape. Obviously, some of these things are easier said than done, but that is how you respond to life. Let's talk about Death. Death right now is extremely, extremely blade reliant. So if you have any way of removing blades, you're already in great shape. So if you're a Myth, you can always Earthquake. If you're a Storm, Catch of the Day. If you are, I guess, a Fire with Nautilus, you could Nautilus. Some people have Aftershock TCs. Some people have Enfeeble TCs that you can actually farm for. These are all great ways to remove blades. But obviously, not everyone has Enfeeble TCs. Not everyone has Aftershock TCs. So what do you do if you're not one of those people? Well, one, you could always make sure that you weakness and brace a lot. These are things that anybody can do, and that will counter blade stacking to a good extent. But if you want to take it one step further, the best thing that you can do against a Det is have triage and have set shields. When a Det blades up a lot, what they're trying to do is have a really, really nice open shot, right? That's their first thing that they want to do. So they want to do a Krulu maybe, they want to do a Winged, maybe they even want a Scion, and they'll just win if they can do that. However, most people won't let them do that. So what you're going to want to do when someone sets shields as a Det is either go for the Minotaur or go for the poison. Now, because anybody can triage, your best bet when you're going against somebody is to Minotaur, right? So that's why you should try to double shield. Now, a double tower shield is a very easy thing to do if you just pack a lot of TC towers, but you're always going to benefit a lot more from a double set shield. If you can double set shield, then what you're basically going to do is prevent the Minotaur completely, and you're going to force your opponent into a position where they are going to have to poison, and that's when you triage or shift and just cancel out a lot of impending damage. If you can manage to do that, you'll beat a lot of Death Wizards, but the only other thing you got to worry about is Shift Ogre. Shift Ogre can remove any type of Death set shield, but it also removes a blade as well. So make sure that when you are shielding up, you don't give them a convenient blade added onto it, because you'll probably get Shift Ogred. The best way to counter Shift Ogre is just to Aegis your shield. If you Aegis a Death shield, you will not get Shift Ogre, because no one's going to waste the 3 pips to just remove a blade. It's never going to be worth it. So you can always just Aegis a Death shield, and you're going to be in extremely good shape against Ogre. And as long as you can do 2 copies of that shield, you'll basically be untouchable by any Death Wizard. The best way to counter Death, obviously, you know, they can strike and try to hit through a set shield. There are situations that will arise, but if you start with that, 9 times out of the 10, you'll give them so much trouble that you'll have an advantage in that battle. Let's move on to the final school, Myth. Myth is just behind Ice in terms of countering them, because they actually have a lot of options. Now, I think a lot of people have this part down. When you're going against a Myth, they can Medusa, and this could cause so many problems. Medusa, if you don't have a stun block, can shut down a Shrike end your game. It could start combos that you can't recover from. Now, against a myth, after you get your first stun block up, make sure that they're not the type to remove a stun block and keep another one. Because a lot of people, what they'll do is just put in one stun block and just discard it. But if your opponent has stuns, or if they summon minions that can stun, it could become an issue. Especially early game, if you pull multiple stun blocks. And if you can afford to, put up one stun block as early as possible, but keep the other one just in case your opponent is the type to take off your stun blocks early. It's a very legitimate strategy. It can completely end your game. Don't make that common mistake. Now, beyond the stuns, there are two other things that make Myth really good. They have really good minions, and they have, obviously, Mystic Colossus now. So against their minions, just save your want hits just for these. I think a lot of people will like try to like, you know, want it like a tower shield off or something. If you can afford to overtime a shield off instead and save your want hits, you're always gonna thank yourself if you can save your wand hits for these. These minions are 0 pips, which is essentially what makes them good, but they also hit every turn. So if this is out, even if you have a set shield, there's a very, very realistic chance that this minion will ruin that for you. People can spam this minion because, again, it's 0 pips, so you're always going to want to save your wand hits for a Golem minion. If you happen to have a Dragoon Amulet, you're gonna also want to save the hits like these, you know, like the Basilisk for Myth, because Myth also has some more powerful minions from Talos and from Baba Yaga. Those are very, very important. So when you're going against Myth, it's really, really good to save certain cards like stun blocks, like minion killers and wand hits. Those are gonna be very, very important. Now, after you have all of that in the back of your mind, Myth gets a little bit more complicated because they can always Mystic Colossus. And the best thing that you can do to counter Mystic Colossus is try to put an Aegis on a set shield. If you can put an Aegis on a set shield, especially if your opponent has already bladed up, you're going to be in decent shape, because what it does is that it forces them to use their blades on a yellow troll to break the Aegis, or it forces them into Minotauring, which is kind of weak for what it does. You can basically force them into not Mysticking. If you can't Aegis, you're also still going to want to set shield very, very regularly against Myth, because at the end of the day, Yaga does too much damage for you to be able to recover from if you let them have an open shot. So whether it's a tower shield, whether it's a set shield, whatever it is, if you see them with 6 pips and a shadow pip, it's almost always the right move to shield, even if they can Mystic. Just think about it. By shielding, you're basically forcing them to do an 885 damage hit instead of something that can do 1425 and summon a minion. Myth is very, very hard to counter. I think it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of luck for your deck to work. But if you can get it down, it is something that you can get down to a science. But yeah, guys, this is the video that I've been wanting to make for anyone trying PvP. Once you figure out what school your opponent is, these are the ways that you can counter that school. All of them have different ways of playing. It's never the same game. It's kind of what makes PvP great. As always, y'all, drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave a sub if you're new. There's tons of links in the description, including my Twitch, my Twitter, my Discord, my Instagram, and my Patreon. As always, if somebody is not told that you're awesome today, they doing something wrong, so stay awesome, my mans. And yeah, y'all.